Africa today. Take care when you're out there. So today, the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Advocate Micheal Masutha, will preside over the Gallows Exhumation Project, which is part of the official digging up, handover and reburial of the remains of 12 of the 83 political prisoners in the Eastern Cape. The 12 were part of the United Democratic Front, or UDF, and were active during the political turmoil between 1985 and 1986. They were they were hanged at the Kgosi Mampuru gallows and then buried in unmarked graves. Joining us is the Minister himself, Micheal Masutha. So good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Good to see you again.
Why was this gallows project actually started?
Well, you'd recall that back in 1996, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as part of closing the chapter of our unenviable past of gross human rights abuses, made a number of recommendations, many of which had to be implemented by the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Now, one of those recommendations was to establish the whereabouts of the remains of those who were killed by the system through judicial or extrajudicial means. Yeah. Now, this category of victims are those who we call having been executed through judicial means. In other words, as a result of court orders when the death penalty still applied. Now, this spanned over a period between 1960 and 1990, when the death penalty was suspended in South Africa, and of course eventually it was abolished as a result of the Constitutional Court judgment that said that the right to life means that the death penalty is inconsistent with our Bill of Rights. Yeah. So we launched the project in March last year, and since then we have been embarking on a process of identifying the graves, because not in all instances were proper records kept of where these people were buried. The whole idea was to keep it a secret from family members, and the task also was to then identify the exact identities of those persons through DNA tests and other research methodologies. So,
since March, how many bodies have been exhumed so far since the launch of the project?
Well, since the out of the 83 that are the ones that the state had to exhume and rebury, bearing in mind that out of the total of 140, initially some of the political parties took it upon themselves to exhume and rebury since post 1994. The 83 were the remaining who obviously required state intervention because of having to identify the identities. Last week in Oudtshoorn, we handed over the exhumed remains of Michael Lucas, which constituted then, now I must get my numbers right, the 46th, I think, out of a total of 83. So that gives you a the remaining 37, I think. I might be having the numbers upside
all
down,
over,
but it's something more.
The reality is that the process is very much so underway. This is yet another step in it, and this particular journey that you're about to embark in takes you to Port Elizabeth, and obviously this is where the bodies will be handed over to the family, the remains, I should say. Does a burial take place immediately after that?
Well, not in all instances. This is a three-stage process. The first process, of course, is the exhumation, and of course the examination of the remains to confirm scientifically that the persons or the remains exhumed are those of the persons concerned. And once that has been completed, there is a date set when the actual ceremony of handover takes place. You'd recall that in the case of last week, for example, we exhumed on the Tuesday. Sorry, we handed over on a Tuesday, and the actual burial happened last Saturday. Okay,
so it takes a while. It must be a very emotional time for the family. Perhaps a time, I don't know if you can find closure from this. I mean, you know, if we take South Africans back in history, we're talking about political prisoners that were hanged in the gallows between 1960 and 1990. And it's a very difficult thing to come to terms with. But I suppose being handed over the exhumes is at least some form of closure for the family. What has your experience been like with the families?
Oh yes, certainly. The families in all instances express satisfaction that they finally have the opportunity to give a decent burial to their loved one after so many years, and despite the length of time that has lapsed in between. The emotions are as if the incident has just occurred. But I also want to mention that even the political home of those victims, namely the political parties concerned, are equally affected emotionally, because very often this would be a person who was not only known to his own comrades, but lived with them, struggled with them, went through all the experiences of torture, of running from the police and security forces and hiding in places, families who assisted in providing refuge to some of the victims, etc. So there's a lot of people beyond just family members who are equally affected.
Minister, very quickly, and when I mean quickly, if we can do this in quite a record amount of time, there's been a very significant development within the Constitutional Court. Friday, you released the Constitutional Justice Project, which basically seeks to assess the impact of decisions taken by the Constitutional Court since democracy. What are the impacts that this is going to have on some of the decisions of the Constitutional Court?
Well, it's not intended to impact on the decisions of courts going forward. Rather, it is for government to appraise itself over the past 2 decades as to what jurisprudence has emerged from the Constitutional Court, to assess the extent to which government has been able to respond to those court judgments in ensuring that socioeconomic rights are protected and promoted in South Africa, and whether there are any gaps that, as various government departments affected, need to plug to ensure that all South Africans have full enjoyment of their socioeconomic rights under the Bill of Rights.
Minister, we leave it there. We thank you so much for your time. Have a good trip to Port Elizabeth today, and of course to the families as well that will be receiving the remains of family members or friends or whatever it may be of those 130 political prisoners that were hanged at the gallows between 1960 and 1990. 1990. May peace be with you today. Visit the website www.justice.gov.za to follow this particular process. Our Minister here in charge of Justice and Correctional Services, Micheal Masutha, thank you very much again.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's take a break. Taxis.